Thank you so much to our invited speakers for joining us today and members of the press. I'd like to start with some brief introductions. Congresswoman Kathy Castor of Florida serves as chair of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and sits on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Last year, Chair Castor introduced H.R. 9, the Climate Action Now Act, which USGBC was proud to support. The bill passed the House of Representatives and would have prevented a withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. This summer, under Chair Castor's leadership, the Select Committee released a 538-page majority staff report entitled Solving the Climate Crisis, which is shaping policy proposals for 2021. Congressman Peter Welch of Vermont has been recognized with several awards for his work on clean energy and is an honorary chair of the Alliance to Save Energy. Congressman Welch has sponsored or co-sponsored countless energy efficiency bills, including in the 116th Congress, the Federal Energy and Water Performance Act of 2020 and the Hope for Homes Act. Congressman Welch also sits on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and has fostered a bipartisan approach to energy efficiency. So thank you both. Don Anderson is an operating partner and chief sustainability officer at the Blackstone Group, one of the world's leading investment firms, with a real estate portfolio topping $341 billion. Don is responsible for evolving sustainability initiatives that deliver cost-effective, quantitative and qualitative results across Blackstone's capital partners and real estate portfolio companies. Don has previously advised government programs such as the Energy Star program and currently serves as the Secretary-Treasurer on the Green Building Certification, Inc. board. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you.
Thanks.
So it's 2020, 5 years since the Paris Agreement and 2 years since the UNFCCC warned of the severe impacts if we allow warming to go beyond 1.5 degrees. And that report set forth what's needed for emission reductions across all sectors, all across the world. We're at a climate tipping point, not just in terms of science, the warming trends, and our ability to control the impacts of temperature change, but now with 2/3 of the American public feeling those impacts locally and supporting government action. The intersection of climate change with the global pandemic, economic recession, and social stresses has implications for action. We've seen how better building design, construction, and operations can boost economies, improve health and well-being, and increase efficiency while also addressing climate. To create a future that improves opportunity and sets us on a new and better path forward, we at USGBC advocate for priority action in 5 areas to provide an immediate jobs boost and deliver long-term schools, federal buildings, critical facilities, private sector incentives, and housing. The House of Representatives has been playing a key role in elevating the climate discussion and moving towards solutions. Through hearings, reports, recommendations, and bills, House committees and members have put forth proposals to tackle the transition from fossil fuels to a clean energy economy. We're excited that buildings are carefully considered in these policy proposals, as they must be, representing about 1/3 of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. Bills like the LIFT Act, which both Chair Castor and Congressman Welch co-sponsored, which would invest in efficiency in public buildings and schools, as well as weatherization of low-income housing. Excuse me. And in the Biden Clean Energy Plan, we see detailed attention to buildings with targets for millions of commercial retrofits, setting a net zero standard for new commercial buildings in the future, and cutting the carbon footprint of our national building stock in half by 2035. The House Select Committee report, House E&C Clean Future Act, and the Biden plan all commit to achieve net zero economy-wide by 2050, call for incentives for states on building codes, invest in energy efficiency in various ways, and expand weatherization and home retrofits. Implementing energy and water efficiency and green building strategies like green roofs, refrigerant management, and grid integration, especially if accompanied by federal funding, could help create construction jobs and restore losses in the hard-hit energy efficiency sector. And these policies can and must be designed to benefit distressed communities and disadvantaged individuals. The question is, how can we get there? Commercial real estate, an important economic sector in the U.S. economy, is still reeling from the pandemic and figuring out its future. Energy efficiency has always had challenges, even if it pays for itself. With the current market uncertainties, how can we scale efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions in this area? Today, we'll hear from our honored guests on what may lie ahead for buildings in the context of climate and stimulus policies next session. What can we expect? What do we need to do? And what's possible? So let's start with the first round of questions with about 5 minutes for each response. And to kick things off, I'll turn to Chair Castor. Congresswoman, how has your committee viewed federal green building policy in terms of climate? And how does that overlap with the need to rebuild our economy?
Great question. Good morning, and thanks to the U.S. Green Building Council. You all were instrumental in informing our majority staff report, Solving the Climate Crisis. And for those on the line who haven't had an opportunity to check it out, go to climatecrisis.house.gov. There's a good link to the 538-page policy roadmap for the Congress, but there's also plenty of summary sheets as well if you don't have time to delve into all 538 policy pages. Let's face it, buildings are key. They're central to what we have to do to tackle the climate crisis and build the clean energy future. Buildings account for a significant portion of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. We need a lot of energy to power our homes, to heat them in the winter, to cool them in the summer, not to mention the emissions that come from the materials we use to build structures. The United States is home to about 125 million homes and 5 million commercial buildings that use an enormous amount of electricity. Residential and commercial buildings are responsible for about 40% of U.S. energy use. And as you mentioned, low and moderate income Americans are really carrying a lot of the burden. They spend a greater percentage of their household budgets on energy, cooking, washing clothes with older and costlier appliances, or generally living in less efficient homes. So addressing building emissions will be critical to the clean energy future and ensuring justice for communities that are all too often left behind. That's why our Congressional Climate Action Plan dedicates an entire section to federal policies for maximizing energy efficiency and eliminating emissions from the building sector. And I want to recognize and thank my good friend and colleague, Representative Peter Welch. Peter and I came into the Congress together 2006 and have served together on energy and commerce. And let me tell you, he is the leader, the champion in the Congress on energy efficiency. And I'm glad you mentioned his thoughtfulness and the way he operates in building bipartisan support for solutions, because that is going to be critical in a closely divided Congress. And who knows what's going to happen in the U.S. Senate elections in Georgia. So things have to be bipartisan, and we're counting on the Green Building Council and all of your associates across the country to helping us get there. So how do we reduce emissions in the building sector? What are those smart policies? Well, the first thing we need to do is make sure the federal government acts as a strong partner to states and local communities, because they are largely in charge of permitting and building codes and the way that local communities are approving new construction there at home. That means we have to provide financial incentives and technical support to those communities. State and local governments are struggling right now due to the COVID-induced economic recession. But they've been the ones leading on green building policies, and it's time that the federal government step up to be the partner that they truly need. That means we need to increase funding for energy efficiency and incentives. We have to improve technical assistance and financial support for implementing new building codes and standards. We have to invest in accelerating the adoption of new technologies like electrification, grid integrated buildings, and green building materials. The federal government also is the country's largest building manager. So there's a lot that we can do to set a good example of reducing emissions from the federal building footprint. But ultimately, we're aiming for a net zero emission clean economy. And that means we need to build every new building and retrofit every existing building to be as efficient, electrified, smart, green, and resilient as it can be. And that's what I think about when I hear the term "let's build back better." Now, you also mentioned the need to rebuild our economy, and that's a huge consideration when we talk about climate action and clean energy. And here's the bottom line: climate solutions are economic solutions. It is that simple. This is an enormous opportunity to create millions of good paying jobs all across America. And meeting this challenge gives us just an incredible opportunity. And it's so heartening to see that this is central to the Biden clean energy, environmental justice, and jobs plan. We've got to reduce, in addition to the job creation piece, we've got to reduce electric bills and the cost for families at a time when they're struggling to rebound and crawl out of this economic recession. So that elevates the importance of energy efficiency. And here's a troubling statistic. Last year, the energy efficiency industry employed more than 2 million Americans, but the industry has suffered huge losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we know we've got to invest in this industry. We've got to double down on clean energy and energy efficiency. And that way we can put millions of Americans back to work, lower those electric bills, and create long-lasting economic growth. These are a lot of the opportunities and careers that we highlight in the Solving the Climate Crisis Congressional Action Plan. Look for our policy proposals now to be introduced through bills in the coming Congress. We already highlighted in our report a number of bipartisan initiatives, such as a number of bills by Congressman Welch. For example, boosting weatherization assistance and LIHEAP, increasing investments in energy efficient, affordable housing. And as Americans continue to experience the worsening impacts of climate-related threats, we've got to ensure the resilience of our homes, businesses, and communities. A lot of folks aren't aware that our Congressional Action Plan, it's not just a clean energy proposal across the entire economy, but it's probably the most impactful report on resilience and planning ahead to reduce the cost of climate that's ever been introduced in the Congress. So those are a few of the hot topics, and I'll look forward to getting into it a little bit more.
Thank you, Chair Castor. That's great. And we certainly join you in seeing this as an opportunity for jobs creation, and along with that, more equity, affordability, and sort of getting the benefits of improved health of our buildings and resilience. So I want to turn to Congressman Welch. You've championed efficiency across all sectors. Now, what do you see as the argument for high-performing green building policy moving forward, given the challenges we have from the pandemic?
Well, let me start by just kind of wrapping up where we are and where we've been. We've had these 4 years with the administration that denied the existence of climate change. And some would say that Congress and the administration had a policy that was designed by the best minds of the 16th century. We did nothing. All right. And there's a change now with President Biden, or President-elect Biden, soon to be sworn in President Biden, there is obviously a commitment to addressing the existential challenge of climate change. But when I started by acknowledging that in the past 4 years we've been stalled and in denial, it doesn't mean in these past 4 years there has been no congressional action. In fact, with Chair Castor's work consolidating the immense amount of work that is being done by folks in your industry, by folks in finance, and by many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, there is a foundation that has been constructed that is going to be the basis of action when we get into the next Congress. And Chair Castor has outlined a lot of that. But the bottom line here is that what's changed is you go from denial to acknowledgement. You go from an attitude where addressing climate change is a threat to addressing climate change is an opportunity. You go from a notion that we can't face this to a notion that a confident nation and a confident people doesn't deny the problems it faces. It challenges those, it fixes them. And it's in that effort of fixing the problems we have that you actually create jobs, you create wealth, and you create opportunity. And, you know, it's really wonderful that we've got the world of finance here, because that has to play an enormous role in creating mechanisms that can help us with the public-private partnerships that are going to be necessary in order to make concrete changes. Now, just a couple of things without repeating some of the things that Chair Castor said. There's a specific commitment from the Biden administration to retrofit 4 million homes. There's a specific commitment from the Biden administration to weatherize 2 million homes. What we also have, as I mentioned, the foundation of work that's been done is really a solid bipartisan level of support, particularly on the question of energy efficiency. And as Kathy mentioned, 40% of the carbon emissions are from buildings. And when we had done so long ago the Waxman-Markey bill, where the goal was 80% carbon reduction by 2050, 40% of those carbon reductions was going to come from the energy efficiency provisions that was in that Waxman-Markey bill. Well, we're back to that. But what I've seen with energy efficiency is that we avoid a lot of these arguments about the source of power. And you have significant support from Republicans like Mr. Representative McKinley, Kinzinger, Upton, Hudson, that supports the idea of efficiency because of all the obvious reasons. A, you save money. B, you create jobs. And C, oh, by the way, you reduce carbon emissions. So the legislation that we have right now even is being negotiated as possibly being contained in an omnibus bill that we may be voting on very, very soon. And that has the bipartisan support of many of the members that I mentioned. So the opportunities that we have are immense. And the in the foundation that's been established means that when we reconvene in the new Congress, we're going to be able to act very, very soon on concrete legislation that is working towards the goals that you all have been working on for so long. You know, energy saving performance contracts, having water standards, hopefully having building standards. And some of these things are being included, as I mentioned, in negotiations right now. But the other question here, and this is where I hope we step back and take advantage of this. We know that it's local jobs, and I come from the most rural state in the country, Vermont, and we have incredible challenges in our rural economy. But when I talk to my Republican colleagues, when I look across America, the rural economy is under enormous stress with lack of broadband, with people leaving, with high energy bills. There is such localization of job creation when you're talking about retrofitting buildings that this has the potential to be one of the biggest jobs programs that we've ever had. It's intensely local, and it requires really smart people to have really good skills in plumbing, in wiring, electrician, incredibly important occupations that we can rebuild. So it's local. Second, it does mean that those building owners and operators or homeowners are going to be able to save money and live in a tighter, cozier house, and that's always good. So I have more optimism now than ever because of that foundational work that's been done in the commitment to the Biden administration, the commitment, as Kathy said, of many of our Republican colleagues to some of these policies that we've been trying to develop for the past 4 years. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Congressman. So Don, you're on the front lines. Blackstone has been a big leader in efficiency and sustainability, in part because it makes business sense. But many others in commercial real estate and smaller owners don't necessarily have the ability to act on that or haven't taken advantage of that return on investment that's already there. What do you see as some of the key building and efficiency policies that could be impactful in supporting private sector action?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I want to go back in time. I've been at this since the late 1970s. We have decades of experience in the U.S. with what you might call public-private partnerships or voluntary market transformation programs. And some of these have become household names. The Green Lights program became Energy Star. LEED is something everybody's aware of now, Better Buildings. We have a lot of experience at how to support the evolution of an energy efficiency marketplace. And I think these programs represent a lot of federal funding, local funding, and a lot of experience that doesn't become outdated. Right? The problems we're trying to solve have to do with how equipment is purchased, operated, and maintained. There's been a lot of collaboration with the utilities so that we can get good data. So I think in some ways, we're more mature than many other countries in that we have labeling platforms, certification platforms, tracking platforms that will look at spend, which is important because there's a return on investment, utility usage, and now emissions. I think we're more mature than we sometimes think we are because we forget what we've already accomplished. But there's an emerging side of this that's of interest to Blackstone, of course, and that is over a dozen regional, local, city level regulations that involve disclosure on websites, fines if your performance is not good enough, specific interventions, and now in New York City, letter grades, which certainly get operators' attention, certainly got our attention. So I think what these things have done is taken this voluntary market transformation tradition that we've had for many decades and made it more regulatory. And I think one of the challenges for us in the US, but it gets more challenging globally, is that there's all types of interpretations at the regional level regarding what we have to do, how we have to report, and what actions we should take. So I think awareness is key. Awareness has never been better, but the action steps, and I think this is where the policy making gets challenged as well. The specific action steps. What do you do in a commercial building? What do you do in a residential building? I think those will be evolving. Part of it's technology, but for me, part of it is how we operate and maintain buildings, and a lot of it is culture, and you build culture via awareness. So at Blackstone, we announced a 15% emissions reduction target for our new acquisitions, and it is around building energy usage. The only reason we were able to do this is because we've had 10 years of experience that shows us that we know how to do this in our business, right, in our markets, in our sectors globally. In terms of the awareness piece, our LPs, our investors, they now know to ask for this specifically. And they may ask for carbon footprints, but when we operationalize it, we have to go back to our buildings and figure out how to make things happen differently in the mechanical room. So there's a bit of a spread there But once our investors start asking for this, they won't stop, and we're in the business of making sure that they're happy. So this is one of the reasons why we've made this commitment, and it's a big commitment, but it's also good for our business. So everything we're doing helps with the asset value, comfort of tenants, safety in manufacturing. And so now the question is, how do we do it? And for me, the how came from decades of observing all the good work on the federal and local level around voluntary market transformations that really become the aggregators. This is the body of knowledge, the library that we've already established. And if we have the patience to go back and mine the library that we've created, we know a lot more than sometimes we think we do. And now with these local and regional regulations, it's literally mandatory that we use what we know to make change happen. So for me, it's been fun to watch the shift from the very first voluntary programs, which really started in the late 80s, to now having over a dozen regulatory hurdles that we have to understand and take seriously.
Thanks, Don. That's a good perspective to bring to this conversation, and we appreciate all the leadership that Blackstone's doing. I'm imagining that there's others in New York City and elsewhere that are having more struggles in trying to figure out how to tackle some of those regulations and how to meet that. So I think going back to what we heard from Chair Castor, there's a federal role for technical assistance and also maybe some incentives to help make that possible. Well, let's turn a little bit to the politics of getting legislation passed. Congressman Welch, I want to start with you this time. How will the election results impact the outlook for federal building policy, and where do you see interests aligning?
Well, I mean, we now have a chance. I mean, it was bizarre with the Trump administration, if I can be candid. It was a badge of honor for the president to basically deny the existence of climate change. And that really made it almost impossible for us to get things done, even though we had a fair amount of bipartisan support. And there was an ideological component to it because there was an opposition to any kind of federal action, whether it was regulatory, whether it was administrative, whether it was using appropriations or using the power of taxing. So it was really a shutdown on any efforts. And what happened during the interim is that the private sector, actually Blackstone, you obviously played a major role in this, and just moved forward to accommodate what was a rising concern, as you say, among your LPs, but also the urgency among young people to address climate change is so powerful. It cuts across so many different political perspectives that I think we've got some wind at our back now that's creating some political opportunity. The burden on us now is to be making certain that what we propose is practical. It has, I think, a lot of merit to set goals and provide those who have to achieve those goals some flexibility, not regulatory micromanaging. I think it makes a lot of sense to make certain that when we're doing this legislation, it is going to be beneficial whether you are from a red district or a blue district. And frankly, this is one of the aspects of this effort that I find so appealing, because the universal need we have to save money, to have cleaner energy, doesn't know political boundaries, really. So I have a lot of optimism about our prospects. And again, Kathy mentioned, there have been a lot of Republicans working with us and us with them on this question of energy efficiency. So I feel pretty good.
Thank you. Don, given the pandemic, economic conditions and climate needs, collectively, we're going to need to operate buildings to optimum efficiency and resilience. What should the federal government's role be in supporting the necessary skills and talents in the private sector? How can federal policy support developing a more robust workforce and what we need to achieve a future of more sustainably operated buildings?
So it's been an interesting year, and I think I didn't expect to have an opportunity to watch Blackstone try to deal with kind of massive dislocation and challenges associated with COVID. Down at my level, what I saw was building operators forced to do complete shutdowns at the portfolio level, or partial operation that they'd never had to negotiate before. And then because COVID's somewhat cyclical, quick startups of the buildings. And so for me, a lot of it is how do you deal with mechanical systems, but it also has to do with how do you bring people back into the buildings? How do you make sure that they're safe? How do you set new rules for distancing and this kind of thing? So there was a lot of activity that happened very quickly. And I think, again, to the theme of awareness, I watched my operators come to appreciate performance data that they had never paid attention to before. Because if you're operating full-time standard operations year after year, you may not feel the need to look for differences that occur when, for example, you shut down a hotel, but your energy data shows that you may not have shut down everything that you can shut down. So even though this is a temporary situation, when you build that type of awareness, or when an operator gets addicted to data, they usually don't go back to the way they were before. So this has been very interesting. And in terms of not to go too deep in the weeds, but how we handle filtration, coil cleaning, air dampers, measurements of fresh air, these are all evolving because I think we're waiting for science to tell us what actually matters while trying to guess what the most important things we can do are. So that's been interesting as well. It's easy to look across the portfolio at a time like this and look for leaders and laggards. And we have the data at Blackstone to do this in our major portfolios. And so that's educational. It takes the leadership challenge up above the building level, so the individual building operator doesn't have to take all the responsibility for understanding how to react. That's absolutely critical to us because of scale, and it relates to how we handle this 15% target. One of the things that we did was assemble specific guidance at the right time as best we could and shared it. And it's easy for us because we do summits with our operators that bring together, for example, all of the office operators. Sometimes we'll even bring together operators from different sectors that may think they're unique, but when you start talking about scheduling and running equipment, they're more similar than they think. So we did a lot of these sharing sessions, lessons learned, specific stepwise guidance, but you also saw this from LEED and also from Energy Star. So this really, I think, kind of put the machinery in high gear to respond to a problem that wasn't an energy performance issue, but it had everything to do with energy performance. I think one of the things for us that I like that is a good setup for how we have to move forward, we were forced to take our connectivity to tenants so that we can support the tenants in our buildings to another level, so that they shared our vision for the right way to handle things during a very unusual crisis. So this was kind of the good side of the pandemic, to watch people learn how to do things better. It absolutely relates to energy efficiency. I think in terms of the future, we've done so much, but I'll give a couple examples that are current examples during the pandemic. Blackstone's working with Lawrence Berkeley Labs and Amazon Web Services. They both have some vision and some offering around remote visibility and remote analytics of opportunities to improve performance. And these rely on data that's a bit more granular than what Energy Star and LEED have used traditionally around certification and labeling, but the data does exist. And if you can get the data in the right hands, which is now cheaper than ever, you can see what you need to do. You can enable operators to be just more intelligent regarding how they operate their buildings. I think this is the thing we can't miss, and I'll go back to my previous theme. We've already built an amazing foundation where we have tracking and benchmarking and certification solutions. These don't need to be scrapped and replaced. You can evolve them to use more granular data that exists. Some of it can come from the utilities. Some of it can come from sensors and sub-meters that are getting cheaper and cheaper and better. So I think we have everything we need to take this to a different level, and it is the policymakers that ensure that this will happen. So a scenario that I don't like is that the dozen or more regional regulations in the U.S. take their own view of how to use this data, and so there's no standard, and so you never get to the right level across the U.S. because you're chasing individual standards that are evolving as experiments that'll take a few years to run to plan. I would rather see a U.S. level orientation toward how data is collected, made available, and utilized, which could be reinterpreted locally. But if you don't get that foundation right, and a good example is Energy Star's Portfolio Manager tool. It's now used by well over 500,000 buildings. That's the place to kind of extend a consistent nationwide approach to how to use data better. So that's really my biggest issue. Can we get better data in the right place so that we can make better decisions faster?
Thanks, Don. And I'm glad you mentioned the labs because they really have done so much for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and buildings data. And, there's so many emerging tools, to your point, including the ability to take, energy use data and basically analyze that and disaggregate it and develop, top recommendations for efficiency upgrades, even without kind of the detailed analysis that maybe has been required in the past, at least as a first pass in trying to screen out some basic next steps. So I think there's a lot there to dive into, and we certainly want to keep supporting the federal role in research and development and deployment. I think is another major area that I think collectively we want to see more focus on because we have to get these tools out there. So thanks for that. And Chair Castor, I guess the last formal question before we turn it over to media questions. What are your views in terms of the outlook to enact climate legislation next year, or to shape infrastructure legislation to have the climate benefits that we all know that we need? President-elect Biden will be rejoining the Paris Agreement. And there are signs such as the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus that more Republican senators are acknowledging the need for climate action. Do you see tax incentives for building efficiency, for net zero, grid integration, some of those things as candidates, or what other areas do you see for bipartisan support next year?
Well, we have to use every tool in our toolbox to move to the clean energy future. So everything that you mentioned, as Peter Welch said, right here at year end, there are going to be some very impactful clean energy policies. Watch what happens out of do we come to bipartisan agreement on hydrofluorocarbons? That is in the mix right now. Significant new investments in research and development in our omnibus appropriations bills. Even the defense bill that passed yesterday has some great resilience and strategic investments for the Department of Defense when it comes to clean energy as well. But in the new year, we know right off the bat that President Biden intends to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. That's vital to America returning as the global leader in clean energy and meeting the goals of the IPCC. And what that also means is that all of those countries are going to be looking at more ambitious national commitments. So what President-elect Biden will have to do is right off the bat demonstrate that we're going much farther than what we committed to in Paris. A lot of other countries are going to say, well, all right, good old USA, you want to come back into the fold and provide leadership. let's see what kind of investments you're going to make and what kind of policies you're going to enact. So that is going to have to be economy-wide. Rebuilding the grid, building the modern grid in America, and then bringing electrification throughout the transportation sector. And of course, the building sector is kind of the unheralded hero in all of this. If we can take those tools that Don talked about, that Peter talked about, yes, they're mature now, but we've got to democratize them so that they are available to all communities, all businesses, all people across America. So that will then become a responsibility of the Congress to follow through with the investments, but with the clean energy plan in every sector. So I'm hopeful. One key is to look at the Moving Forward Act that was passed in the House last summer. That's the big transportation and infrastructure bill. I think that will be the template that we work on. The COVID emergency relief bill that's being negotiated right now, I don't view it or call it a stimulus. The stimulus will come with President-elect Biden's leadership, and it will be akin to a Recovery Act, but it will be the cleanest and greenest clean energy focused transportation infrastructure, environmental justice, and jobs package that we've ever put together. Our Solving the Climate Crisis roadmap will inform that work as well. But we are going to need all of you to help build the bipartisan support for what we need to do down the road.
Thank you. Appreciate those thoughts. So let's go right to questions. And there's one that is a good follow-up to those remarks, Chair Castor. So now that you've published the report, do you expect the Select Committee to be reestablished next year to continue its work on these issues as climate moves to the legislative phase?
Well, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. It hasn't been re-upped by the Speaker officially, but the good news is that we're pretty united on the Democratic side, in the Democratic caucus, for ambitious action on clean energy and environmental justice and jobs, right in sync with President Biden's plan. And we have a lot of bipartisan support on certain elements, but we've got to build broader support. And there's nothing like public sentiment to help push a lot of our GOP colleagues. And of course, those Georgia Senate elections are going to be critical, because Mitch McConnell, unfortunately, has been a roadblock to so much of what we need to do when it comes to clean energy and jobs. So that will be key to our ambition going forward.
Thank you. Okay, another question for all of you. Are you looking to create grants? Are you looking to help create lending for businesses and individuals that are interested in making these efficiency and energy generation improvements? So what are sort of the more specifics of the mechanisms? Is it grants? Is it finance? What are the tools you're thinking of? Congressman Welch, do you want to start? Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We want to get everybody involved and have an incentive to be involved. So one of the original bills was when I co-sponsored with Representative McKinley, the Homes Act. And we've got a version of that now, but it gave taxpayer incentives for them to put some money into retrofitting their homes, and they would get a tax credit depending on how much efficiency savings they were able to obtain. So, this is a public-private partnership where you've got a homeowner who has an incentive to lower his or her energy bill, have a tighter house, to lower that cooling bill, and they get some money from the federal government through a tax credit. And this is an incredible opportunity for the contractors who become extremely busy. So that's an example. The other is where I think it's going to be a challenge for us, and this is where folks like Don and Blackstone and others can be very helpful. Regulations can help, as we saw, with Energy Star. They've established the standard, but they've got to be smart, and they've got to be they can't be too prescriptive, but it's a tool that when properly utilized is really, really helpful so that everybody is not fighting in a race to the bottom to get short-term cost savings with long-term pain. And then I think in appropriations, the infrastructure bill that we passed in the House this year, and obviously didn't go anywhere in the Senate, had a lot of things that Kathy was talking about, really green provisions, sustainability provisions that are broadly popular in cities, whether it's a Republican or Democratic mayor. So the basic tools of government should be used. They should be used widely. But the fact is there's a role that government has to play, and there's been no role that we've been playing for the past 4 years in moving forward on these policies. Kathy, I don't know.
Yes, the tax credits, tax incentives, like I said, it's an all hands on deck moment. We have to use every tool. One of the other important bills I'll highlight to all of you is the Green Act that of Mike Thompson and the Ways and Means Committee. That is the package of clean energy tax incentives for renewable and for automobiles. Look for that to be front and center as well. They really need to be extended, modernized, expanded, along with the incentives for building owners out there to do the kind of retrofits that we're going to need.
Thanks. Don, do you want to add anything on that?
I'm okay on this. Maybe I'll
okay.
Let me try this. I seek consistency so that there's one flavor, right? And I think these things can't be too prescriptive, but I think where we're finding just overarching flaws in how we go about our business, sometimes a little prescriptive doesn't hurt for the many folks that really haven't started their journey.
So a follow-up, which I think I'll start with you, Don. Is there an example of a public-private partnership relating to building sustainability, and what are some ideas for future partnerships?
It's good. So for me, I tend to like the foundation that we've built over time. So I've been involved in supporting USGBC, GBCI, and LEED for many years. And LEED for cities, nothing could be more exciting for me to see a single building certification system expand out to that level. And I like the ARC platform, which is a tracking solution that covers many more things than just emissions. Energy Star, we talked a little bit about the national labs. I worked with them when we were designing algorithms for benchmarking, and that was in the mid-90s. So it's time to expand the granularity of the Energy Star tools so that we can get a little bit more information faster rather than relying on monthly utility bills. And then I didn't mention earlier the history of utility demand side management programs that incentivize very specific proven moves has been amazing. But again, it's a very granular variety of different options. A little bit more consistency wouldn't hurt, because it would allow national service providers, which is where you create jobs, to learn how to do key things nationally rather than becoming very bespoke to regional demand side management programs. So that's an area where I think we could do better. And Energy Star and LEED have good relationships with utilities, and I think that conversation matters. So I like synergies between these different efforts. And I also understand why healthy competition is good, but for my operators, which are all over the world in many different sectors, I'd like to see some consistency. And then finally, we've been at this for a while. We started because we thought it was the right thing to do for our investors, because it does have a return. But to me, it's just better operations. It involves evolving the culture so that you get a better performance across the portfolio. I love it when I get tapped to provide thoughts and experiences to the federal government, and I spent some time down on Capitol Hill, and we're always available to share, and I think you'll see us do more of that as we roll out our 15% emissions reduction commitment.
Thanks, Don. I'm going to paraphrase one question here to anyone that'd like to take it. You know, sometimes we see incentives or programs that target particular technology, and other times a more technology neutral. You know, with the carbon conversation that is kind of becoming front and center again, whether it's electrification and some of those technologies. Some states are taking a single technology approach. You know, I think we still see that efficiency has to come first, no matter, you know, we also need renewable energy, but they have to work together. So what are your thoughts on that, sort of the single technology versus outcome-based approach to either regulations or incentives?
Well, I'll start. I mean, my preference is the outcome-based and consistency. That makes it, I think, much more possible for everyone from a local electrician to be able to use her skills, whether she's in Vermont or New Hampshire, because the rules are the same. And the light touch, I think, is a preferable way to go. So you're focusing on what's the carbon reduction. But efficiency versus the fuel source, those are really separate categories. Because a lot of what we have to do to get the use of reduce carbon emissions is to electrify, but then we also have to have clean energy that's producing the power for the electric grid. And I know, Kathy, you've worked on that enormously in your work, so I'll stop there.
Would anyone else like to add, Chair Castor or Don?
You know, one of the important factors in having some national standards, and I agree with Peter, outcome-based is best over time. There are some states and local communities that are real leaders, and they have set very ambitious goals. And once you set the goals, they're on their way to meet them. But I come from the so-called Sunshine State, and we are still generating a paltry amount of electricity from clean energy sources. You would think we'd be a leader in solar power, but they kind of their ideological roadblocks for the most part, and it really isn't fair, because that means we're losing out on a lot of those clean energy jobs. Our so-called Public Service Commission wanted to eliminate energy efficiency standards on the state level. That makes no sense at all for consumers and businesses. So that's why some national consistency, national push on clean energy standards and energy efficiency standards is going to be vital going forward if we're going to meet our goals and unlock the opportunities for all Americans.
So I'll give my maybe too deep in the weeds piece on this. It takes a lot of effort to establish labels for appliance and equipment performance, and it takes a lot of work to determine what constitutes, for example, a LEED credit for getting certification. Those efforts are very important, and it kind of gives the operational community, the design and construction community, a palette of options that they can easily recognize as having more to do with performance improvement than maybe aesthetics or first cost. Mm-hmm. And again, the awareness of these labels or the certification capabilities of certain options is important, and it takes time to establish that awareness in the marketplace. So I think it's critically important. It doesn't have to be prescriptive, but it does have to be educational and motivational. But that at the same time, because of the size of the existing building stock, we have to evolve and continue to build awareness around benchmarking comparative performance in a way that's easy for the vast majority of buildings. And so the place to start is where we have started, and that's with utility bills and comparative utility bills based on size of the building, location of the building, operating hours, people, the kind of things that you do to look for leaders and look for laggards, and where you find leaders, they get certified or they get a label. I think the two ends of the spectrum need to be balanced. And then I think when policies are made, they need to consider the full spectrum, because that's how you kind of build awareness along the life cycle of the building so you can have maximum benefit.
Yeah, and that awareness, education, technical support is clearly a theme of this whole conversation this morning. I think we have time for one last question. So supporting health has been part of green building all along, but the pandemic has really put a spotlight on the connection between buildings and occupant health, as well as community health. How is health being considered within potential climate building policies, as well as by companies moving forward?
Well, we have a number of policy recommendations in our Solving the Climate Crisis report from, span the spectrum on clean air and clean water, making sure really that these opportunities and investments are made in communities of color, frontline communities that have often carried the burden of decades of underinvestment and, kind of reciting polluting plants over and over again in the same neighborhoods. So this is going to be part of the reckoning on racial justice moving forward that President-elect Biden has said is front and center for his administration. That we're still waiting to see who is on the environmental team, EPA, Interior, NOAA, all of the environmental agencies. But I think you've seen so far from the Biden administration that clean energy and climate are just going to be central to everything they do as part of their term in office.
Yeah. Any final closing statements anyone would like to offer?
I want to thank you. I mean,
Yeah.
This is terrific, and I'm really looking forward to working with my good friend and my classmate Kathy Castor, who's our leader here, with her chair position on her committee, and it's going to be good things are going to happen.
Well, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Don, Elizabeth, everyone with the U.S. Green Building Council. You all, again, were instrumental in informing our Solving the Climate Crisis congressional roadmap. But now, okay, we've got the roadmap, so let's put it into action. We've got to hammer this out into legislation, build bipartisan support, and you all are key to building that broad-based political support across the country that we're going to need. So thanks again.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Chair Castor, Congressman Welch. We really are grateful for your time today, and thanks to all the members of the press who joined. So have a great day.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.